Professor Chiliti Marwala, thank you very much for joining us on NCAT in Law. I would like us to have a conversation about various issues. The first, we divide this into various segments. There are about 4 segments, each of which deals with a separate topic. And the first one will be dealing with your person, what your background is, and so on. And then we'll go to leadership, and then we'll go to technology and professions. And then we end off with this beautiful book called Leadership Lessons from Books I Have Read. We'll get to this book at the tail end. Can we start with, who are you exactly?
Well, my name is Chiliti Marwala. I come from Venda. And of course, when I was born in 1971, Venda was a homeland. You know, it was a so-called self-governing homeland. Of course, we know the complexities of the Bantustan Act. You know, and during that time, it seems when people used to be born, they were never given birth certificate. But my uncle started working for the Department of Home Affairs. And about 6 years after I was born, I got my first birth certificate that was actually printed by hand and signed by my uncle. You know? So I was born there, and then obviously I was educated there, and ultimately Venda became part of the TBVC states, Transkei, Botswana, Venda, and Ciskei, with the so-called independent. So we had our own IDs, which are actually destroyed when I went to United States as an undergrad. And when I came back to South Africa, after 1994, I went to Home Affairs in Thohoyandou and applied for the South African ID, and the Republic of Venda ID came back. So my Republic of Venda ID that I have now is actually printed after 1994. Of course, it shows about the complexity of the transition, you know, because legally you could use that ID to vote and so on and so forth. So that's where I was, that is me. And I was educated at a school called Mbiri. It's a science school. In fact, I'm here where they were basically celebrating me today. And when I was in matric, I entered Science Olympiad, and I was the winner of Science Olympiad. And because I was a winner of Science Olympiad, I went to England and I spent 2 weeks in London. I went to Cambridge University, where I ultimately went and did my PhD in artificial intelligence. 10 years later, I graduated from the time I visited there. I was at Imperial College of the University of London. That is where the conference was. And that is where I began my academic career after my PhD, you know.
Yes.
And when I finished matric, I wanted to study engineering. And they said, Black kids cannot study engineering without some form of bridging. And then some bridging program. And I'm being told this, you know, towards the end of the year. I had even appeared on the newspaper as one of the top matriculants.
Yes, you do say, sorry to interrupt you, Prof. You do say in your book, there is a part where you're saying one of the teachers, your science teachers, set an exam paper, and you wrote the exam paper and got 100%. Now, he said he would share the questions that he had put with his daughter. Can you tell us a little bit about that incident?
Yeah, I think started at 8, and then the teacher, it was an Afrikaans teacher, set the test, and I got 100%. He says, I'm gonna set it for my daughter because she's using exactly the same textbook. He even showed it, but it was in Afrikaans. And then I went to him and I said, "So where did your daughter get this? I'm not going to tell you." So of course I knew that the reason why I'm not being told is probably because I got better marks than his daughter. You know?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's an intriguing story. Now,
Yeah. So
yeah.
then in fact, the head of the Vets Business School, Maurice Haded, came to my high school representing Shell and says, "We're going to give you a scholarship." And ultimately, they told me that I will have to go back to high school. I will have to go back and do British A levels at St. John's College. I was not a happy guy. They said, "You can't go directly. We need to sanitize your Bantu education." You know, so I spent 1 year in Johannesburg.
Yes. Now, when did you first realize that Chilitsi Marwala was a leader in the making?
Well, you know, I always say I was a reluctant leader. My goal was to become a professor and be building the next generation of leaders. I'm very passionate about building the next generation of leaders. Just to give you an example, I have supervised to completion 37 PhDs and 48 master's degrees. And when I just reflect on where some of these people are, I mean, Busisiwe Vilakazi was perhaps the first Black South African woman to get a PhD in artificial intelligence. She was my master's student and she completed a PhD at Oxford University. The CEO of the NRF was my PhD student. Dalton Lunga, who now lives in the United States, was my PhD student. You know, so I really just wanted to be a professor and nurture the next generation of leaders. Now that I have studied leadership much broader, I realize that leadership is more than the positions that you hold. I realize that leadership is everywhere. Teachers are leaders because they are actually grooming the next generation of people. In our churches, we have leadership and so on and so forth. And perhaps the biggest miscalculation that we have made as South Africans is to assume that leaders are only political leaders. Leaders are not only political leaders. You know, so it was a process. It was not a point where I said, "Now I am going to pursue leadership." I think leadership is everywhere.
Yes, just the last issue in this segment before we break and go to another segment, Prof. I read somewhere that you've been appointed, is it the UN Under Secretary General, but not only that, but also as a rector of the University of the United Nations. Can you tell us briefly what exactly it entails to be an under General Secretary and a rector of the UN University? What is it that they teach at the UN University? And what are the key issues or responsibilities of an under General Secretary of the United Nations? Congratulations, by the way. I believe you're starting on the 1st of March.
Absolutely. No, the United Nations University is a university that is in now 16 different countries. It's a postgraduate university that only offers master's and PhD degrees. And what is special about the United Nations University is that its research focuses on the issues that are of interest to the United Nations. Issues of water, issues of energy, issues of health. For example, the Global Health Institute of the United Nations University is in Malaysia. Issues of the economy, The Economic Institute is in Finland, and so on and so forth. So, so that is what my rectorate means. It means I had this institution. On the other hand, I am the Under-Secretary General of the United Nations. South Africa, there's only been 3 people. I'm going to be the 3rd person to be an Under-Secretary General of the United Nations. These are, there are 22 Under-Secretary Generals who had the agencies of United Nations. So the agency that I am going to be heading is the United Nations University. The other person who was an Under-Secretary General was Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, who was heading the UN Women. The other one was Judge Pillay, who was heading the Human Rights Agency of the United Nations. So it is a mixture of diplomacy, global diplomacy, and academic leadership.
Okay, well, now I understand better. Thank you, Prof. I hope the people who are watching are also have a better understanding of what that all entails. But why wouldn't you? I would have thought South Africa needs more leaders of your ability. Is there any reason why you wouldn't establish something akin to, obviously not at an international level, but something akin to the University of the United Nations to cater only for postgrad, masters, and PhDs here in South Africa?
No, absolutely. I think that is a big opportunity. Part of the reason was because I really believe that the world is interconnected, and that we need to have South Africans representing us globally. I think that is extremely important. So part of the reason why I decided to leave was because I actually have fulfilled everything I thought I set to achieve when I became the Vice Chancellor of the University of Johannesburg. For example, I leave University of Johannesburg as a much wealthier university than I found it. When I came to the University of Johannesburg, it had an endowment of only 900 million. Now I leave it with an endowment of 5 billion rands, one of the largest. When I came 5 years, 2 months ago, as Vice Chancellor, the university was producing the 6th most research in the country, which means we received the 6th research subsidy from government, which are hundreds of millions of rands that we receive. I leave the University of Johannesburg as the #1 research university in the country. It's going to be announced now. Last year when it was announced, we were ahead of VETS, UCT, University of Stellenbosch, University of Pretoria, and so we are now #1 in terms of research productivity.
Oh, yeah.
We have 600 postdocs. We have 2 brand new campuses that were bought during my time. One of it used to be the big offices of Media 24, where newspapers such as City Press were housed next to SABC building. Now is the University of Johannesburg. And I also leave a university that is really firmly grounded in the 4th Industrial Revolution. The only thing that I have not accomplished is the establishment of the medical school. And the reason why it has not been accomplished is because the political wing of that establishment seems to grind slower than the academic wing. But I'm confident that the University of Johannesburg is going to have a medical school. So I am going there to gain international experience so that I can come back and plow it back to the South African community.
Thank you, Prof. Well, my daughter has a an interest in maths and science. She's a matric this year. So perhaps instead of her going to MIT, I should try and encourage, because that's where she wants to go, either MIT or Cambridge University. Maybe I should try
Yeah.
to talk her into trying the local universities, such as the University of
But I
Johannesburg.
mean, I'm an alumni of Cambridge University, and Cambridge University is it's a great university. But if she has those two choices, and she really wants to go overseas, because there's nothing wrong with going overseas. South Africa's leadership cohort must be diverse and must have been trained in all the places, in China and so on and so forth, in the United States, in England, in Sweden, so that we can have an ecosystem of good thinkers as our leadership core. But if she is given those two options, I would say she should go to MIT. I know I'll get into trouble from Cambridge, and the reason is very, very simple. The reason is because American education is multidisciplinary, whereas the British education is too specialized. We live in an era where a person who would have thought that a computer scientist must understand linguistics. If you are going to produce GTP, you have to understand both computers and language. And American education system is much more multidisciplinary.
Yes, no, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor. We'll talk about that chat GTP in one of the following segments. We'll pause now and then we'll resume in the next segment shortly.